Nauvoo, a word meaning a beautiful place. And what a beautiful place this is. Hi, my name is Gabriel Rugner. I've been living in Nauvoo for about 5 months now, and I've grown to truly love this beautiful place that was established by so many amazing people. Now, we know the story of Joseph Smith. We know that the saints moved here and were eventually kicked out due to political and religious reasons. But what was this town like before? And what happened after a town bigger than Chicago almost entirely moved out in less than the span of 1 year? Well, we will be going over that today. I will be going over who lived here before Nauvoo was Nauvoo. A short little recap of what happened here in Nauvoo, more specifically what everyone else thought about these people in Nauvoo. And then finally, how was this area affected by the saints and what happened afterwards? So, starting in the 1800s, this town was not a town at all. It was actually a group of small tribes that were forced west and eventually settled here along the Mississippi. Now remember, during this time, the Mississippi was much smaller. So there was a lot of rocks, and there were rapids specifically in this V in the river here at the Mississippi. Because of this, Fort Madison on the other side of us, and all the way down there, a town now known as Keokuk, were major trade hubs for any boat here along the Mississippi, because you had to get out, take all your stuff, take it to the town, and then kind of cart it in carts down to either Keokuk or up to Fort Madison. Because of that, this area on this side of the Mississippi was a little bit more sparse, which made it perfect for Chief Keokuk and the Sauk and Fox tribes to come and live here. Now, it was not all peaceful, and unfortunately, there was a big war between the natives here and the local settlers. But Chief Keokuk decided to strive for peace. And because of this, he was able to keep this specific area out of the lot of trials and tribulations that passed for these people. Now, early in the 1820s, a man by the name of Captain White, after his time in the War of 1812, decided to move here. He had received a bit of land as payment for this war, and he decided that this was where he was going to stay. He built a wonderful house where he had constant commerce and trade and talkings with the Native Americans in this area. And because of this, many people moved here. It became a town of about 100 people named Venus because of the V in the river where the rapids are. Now, it didn't receive many more people because there wasn't much of a reason, but the United States government and the people in the area decided they were willing to change that. So early in the 1830s, they decided to rename this town to Commerce because they planned to build a path, a waterway along this side of the river so that they can make it to the other side and create more commerce. Now, this never panned out, and unfortunately, the town swelled to 200 people, but then shrunk very rapidly because the government had to stall their plans because of various problems and lack of funding. Now, during this time, there was a group of people known as the Mormons, or members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, that had been forced out of their towns in the West and were resettling in a place here known as Quincy. But they knew they couldn't stay in Quincy. So they set up a deal with Captain White and the various people in this area and bought a bunch of this land here in Commerce so they can make a town for themselves, a peaceful land, a beautiful city, otherwise known as Nauvoo. Now, I want to read for you what it says on Nauvoo's own website about this time period. Specifically, that the same year that the Cherokee peoples were forced from their lands and began their Great Trail of Tears through western Illinois, another group of unfortunates made their way to the area who had been forcibly removed from the state of Missouri. Members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, commonly called Mormons, began huddling in the remains of the abandoned Fort Des Moines in the winter of 1838 to 1839 as tribes of Israel, and should therefore be treated as a blessed people of God, doing what they could to assist them. On several occasions, the Mormon prophet Joseph Smith held meetings with Chief Keokuk, who remained in the area with his tribe until 1845. No great Nauvoo meeting during the Mormon sojourn was complete without the presence of either Chief Keokuk or some of his emissaries. With hopes of creating a strong settlement along the Mississippi for trade and goods and stopping point for people traveling westward to expand the great United States of America, commerce was then established as Nauvoo. With Joseph Smith leading the cause, what could possibly go wrong? And for the first few years, a lot actually went really well. The saints here in Nauvoo thrived and prospered under the leadership of Joseph Smith, the unions, and various different businessmen who moved into the area once they saw the boom town that was being created out of Nauvoo. Now, at first, there were surrounding towns who had very good economies. For example, Warsaw was a leader in the industry with a booming town of about 500 people, a hotel, and also a school. This was very big for the time, considering this area was a very new area of the United States, with about 40,000 in population here on the West Bank near the Mississippi. Now, for Warsaw, unfortunately, and for the other surrounding towns, Nauvoo was going to take the spotlight for a while. During those 7 years, the industries thrived. It was amazing to watch how, under the direction of the Lord, this town that had barely anyone outside being drunken and no sort of tavern or place where people would just gather and kind of be rowdy, that this town full of saints, people who wanted to follow God, became so prosperous. Now, they didn't trust outside industries at first because of the Kirtland Safety Society and because of various runs on banks during this time period. It was actually very hard for them to secure physical monetary funds. So most of the area put their efforts into bartering. Most of the goods that were traded were mainly in this area. Joseph Smith and the council decided that in order for Nauvoo to thrive, it was best that everyone used Nauvoo resources. Because of that, there was a tariff put on almost anything outside of Nauvoo. But because of this, industries here expanded exponentially. Farms as far as the eye could see, over 2,000 buildings at its height, 15 to 20,000 people living here, over 17 different unions who controlled the different industries and allowed for free trade between the people in Nauvoo. This town was truly a blessed town. There's a quote by Joseph Smith that I personally love. Joseph Smith truly said, "This is the loveliest place and the best people under the heavens. Little do they know the trials that await them." And there were many trials that awaited them. Over that course of the 7 years that they were here, a lot of it was peaceful. But unfortunately, there was a lot brewing underneath the surface, especially for the people that lived originally here in Nauvoo before they arrived, and also the surrounding towns. Like I said before, Warsaw was a boom town, but unfortunately, with Nauvoo, their spotlight was taken away, and it's caused a lot of tension between them and Nauvoo. Along with this, because of the militia that came with Joseph Smith and the saints, the other towns were quite afraid, because this town of 15,000 had a militia that was 10 times the size of any local militia in the area. This, with distrust due to people claiming to be saints, stealing horses, then running back to Nauvoo where it was safe and the county commissioner couldn't follow them, caused many people to loathe the saints and want to destroy them. Unfortunately for them and everyone else in the town of Nauvoo, they would not know the trials that would face them towards the end of their stay here in Nauvoo and then their eventual journey westward. Now, Joseph Smith, unfortunately, was killed in the June of 1844. And it was a very trying time for the saints. But under the leadership of Brigham Young, all this industry full of woodworking and barrel making and farms and manufacturing and gunsmithing and all these different industries all decided to come together and focus their efforts on building wagons. And by the end of it, I have a statement here on how much they were able to make. Nearly 1,500 wagons were built by Thanksgiving of 1845, and another 2,000 were partially completed by midwinter. Confident most wagons would be ready for a spring exodus, church trustees and advertised the undersigned wish to purchase 1,000 yoke of cattle from 4 to 8 years old for the removal of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. A ready market will be found for the working cattle and mules that may be brought in. Over 20,000 acres of good farming lands, some of which are highly improved, were offered in exchange for goods, cash, oxen, cows, sheep, and wagons. The land would eventually be sold to the final group here in Nauvoo, and that group would be known as the Icarians, a group of French communists who decided to take the wreckage of what was left after the saints had left to use it for their own purposes of building a commune where everyone could work in harmony. The Icarians, a group who moved here to Nauvoo almost directly after the saints in March of 1849, in a time when most of the people were a little bit wary of a new community coming in. But with these 500 French Icarians, Etienne Cabet, the founder of this entire Icarian movement, decided that this is where they were going to stay. He was fascinated by the ruins, especially the temple that had already been burned at this point, but he wanted to make this the town or the utopia for the Icarians. Now, all this was based on a book that he had written in 1840 called Voyage en Icarie, or The Voyage of Icaria. And this book talked about having the means of production controlled by a central state and everyone being focused on the goal of furthering the community. Originally, there were about 500,000 people who signed up for this entire journey, but because of the French Revolution and everything kind of going crazy, there were only about 500 who were able to make the journey with him in the 1850s. And so, with that, they started out. But unfortunately, due to a lot of infighting, and Etienne Cabet having to leave for a year for France to clear his name after someone said that he had swindled them, the community almost completely fell apart. It honestly reminds me of a principle that Joseph Smith liked to say: I teach them correct principles, and they govern themselves. Unfortunately, this was not the case for the Icarians, and shortly after they had gathered, in the space of 7 years, they unfortunately fell apart due to a lot of infighting and people not wanting to follow this set of rules that Cabet had set forth. And he tried to gather everyone together again, but unfortunately just never really worked out. And with that, the saga of Nauvoo and the saga of the people here was left to normal people. Germans moved in, created massive wineries in the area, and that's how it continued until the present day. The Prophet's Last Ride, a beautiful statue to represent his final experience here in Nauvoo as he rode out of the town with the saints watching in utter disbelief at what was happening to their beloved prophet. Now, this wasn't a time of sadness when looking at the multitude of blessings that were given to the saints here. From day one, there were thousands of blessings given to the saints all over the swampland at the time of Nauvoo. One of my personal favorites is when Joseph Smith was deathly ill with malaria from the various mosquitoes, and he went from house to house blessing all the brethren and spreading them out. The priesthood helping every single household to be healed of this plague of malaria that was infesting all of them. Not only were there regular miracles, but there were much greater miracles for us in this day that they started here in Nauvoo. The temple endowment ceremony, baptisms for the dead, the various ordinances that we have here in the temple all started in Nauvoo. It is wonderful and amazing to look at the various sections of the Doctrine and Covenants that were given to us because of Joseph Smith and his time here with the saints. I do believe that is why he called it such a blessed and happy place. It truly was one of the greatest bodies of saints here on this earth. Now, when we look at Joseph Smith and his various accomplishments, we must also remember the amazing amounts of missionary work that were done. The 70s Hall, much farther down the hill, was a gathering place for the saints, where various saints would literally be called on missions in front of the congregation. One of the most famous of these missions would be the mission of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, when they were called to Europe and to specifically England, so they could bring thousands of people under the gospel and bring them to Nauvoo. It is truly a wonderful place. I'm glad that I got to spend my time here, and most importantly, I'm glad that Joseph Smith and the Saints spent their time here. So after all of this, what did I learn? Well, I really learned that it's complicated, that Nauvoo is not just some place where the Saints were, but Nauvoo is this wonderful place where many different people of many different backgrounds, religions, and faiths decided to gather to test their luck here along the Mississippi. I talked to a local historian about what was the difference. Why was Nauvoo so important? Well, she said that the Saints really helped out. She said, out of everything, to just look at the local towns surrounding Nauvoo and Nauvoo itself. While Nauvoo never was a huge town, it is leaps better than every other town around it, where buildings are falling apart and people have left. But Nauvoo, slowly and steadily, has stayed the same for the past 200 years. And that is really the beauty of it. Because of the Saints and their love for this city, I truly believe this place is blessed and protected. And that is my journey here in Nauvoo.